I had heard that, like the third Caliph, they discovered that there were contradictory copies of the Quran, and basically they gathered up the copies that did not match. They burned those copies. Have you heard that before, or what? Yeah, I guess I'm curious, what's your perspective?
So actually right here at the center, Sheikh Shakiel and I, we worked on an entire course just on this topic alone. Yeah. So originally the Qur'an is a multi-form text, right? So it's not a text that has only one wording. Like from the very beginning, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he taught different pronunciations and different ways of reciting various verses. And sometimes those variants, they have different, not contradictory, different complementary meanings, right? So from the very beginning, he taught it as a multi-form text. In addition to the Qur'an, we also have the prophetic tradition, right? The Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in which we have also narrations of his statements and his actions that have been preserved along with the Qur'an as well. Right? So if you read those narrations, you'll find the Prophet Muhammad teaching one companion a certain way of reciting this chapter, and another companion would then hear of that and not know about it. But then when they would come to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he would confirm that he had taught them both this way. So there's explicit mention of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that this Qur'an was revealed in a multi-form method, where it wasn't just one way of reading it. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he had told the companions that whichever one of these multi-forms you choose, it is totally sufficient. Meaning, if you never learn the other ones, if you learn one way of reciting it, then that's totally sufficient, right? So Uthman, what he decided to do is that he decided to, look, let's take a copy of the Qur'an that was made earlier, and let's standardize this one copy that is according to a certain way of reading the Qur'an, and let's just remove all of the rest. Let's have everyone burn their copies, and let's just follow this one just to limit the differences, not to say that those differences were necessarily wrong or corrupted. It's just to unite the people and to minimize the level of differences that they have. He made multiple copies of that standardized copy, and then this was sent to all of the different cities. And he sent, along with every copy, right? He sent reciters that would then teach that community.
I think the important point is that the Quran was revealed in 7 modes. There were multiple tribes. You think about it, think of it like American English in one way, American English and British English, right? We may have certain words that are different. Like we'll call it chips. What will they call it in the UK? Crisps, right? And so you imagine you have different tribes at different locations within the Arabian Peninsula that are used to saying crisps instead of chips. And this is part of the miracle, that when the angel Gabriel came with the Quran, he came with it in 7 different modes where the Prophet Muhammad recited it to different tribes. And the challenge to produce a chapter like it was then made available to all the tribes. So someone could have said, well, I don't know that dialect or that mode of recitation, so the challenge is not for me, right? And so the challenge was made for all of them, and none of them responded. And so the Prophet Muhammad taught all of those modes to his companions, his disciples, and they learned it. And so as time went on, when Islam was being embraced throughout the world and it reached non-Arabs, this is now the 3rd Caliph, right? Because the first 2 Caliphs, there weren't much issues regarding that because they had the knowledge, they were freshly close to the revelation. But when it went to non-Arabs who were not that strong in their language, of the Arabic language, they would have these confusion disputes. Is it crisps or is it chips? Maybe I heard him say chips, but he also said crisps. Maybe it's crisp or chips, right? And so Uthman looked at this and said, just to avoid these disputes, we're going to take the mode that the Prophet Muhammad taught his indigenous tribe and make that the standard, because that's the tribe he's from, and that became the standard to avoid any conflict. But the important thing is that all of those forms are traceable back to the Prophet Muhammad. even to this day. Right? You have something called recitation of qira'ah, recitation. They're all traceable back to the Prophet Muhammad. So it's not like Uthman said, you know what, let me look at this and we'll make this the Quran. No, that's what a lot of people accuse Uthman of, but that's false, right? And because Uthman's process was twofold. Number one, now the Quran was put together in the time of the first Caliph already, right? And it was written down, put together, compiled already. And so Uthman, he asked everyone who had memorized a verse to bring a witness and to testify that they got that verse directly from the Prophet Muhammad. And then they also had to bring written parchments that the scribes directly got from the Prophet Muhammad. So when you had this happening, the actual disciples and the scribes of the Prophet Muhammad who got the Quran directly from the Prophet Muhammad were living and alive. So all this was very easy and possible to do. And when the top of them was his name was Zayd, who was a direct disciple and scribe of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad had about 65 plus scribes, right? And the majority of them were alive, especially the top ones like Zayd. And so Zayd was there, part of the process, verifying every single verse. And if there was a verse, even though people had memorized it, and someone could not bring a witness, it was not accepted until a witness came forward and said, yes, I swear and bear witness that I was there when he learned this verse directly from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This kind of verification process doesn't exist for any religious book on the face of this earth. And we have all that documented with their names, their biographies, and all that.
So, do we have multiple manuscripts of the Torah, like variants, and of the Gospels as well? Yes. But see, the thing is with the Gospels is that these are, you could say, more like biographical accounts of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So they're not coming from the perspective of like, I mean, okay, some Christians might say that these words were inspired by God, but really they're the words of John. They're the words of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, right? It's like their account, okay? And that's why if you read certain accounts and you read across the Gospels, like you'll find some differences there. You're also going to find some discrepancies there as well, right? But the thing is like, okay, why did that happen? Is the Gospels a text that was multiform from the very beginning in terms of the way that it was supposed to be read? The answer is no, not exactly, right? Luke wrote what he wrote. John wrote what he wrote, right? And this is why you
we're
might
not
even
sure
have
if it was
some,
John or Luke because
we don't know exactly who they are.
Because it says gospel according to Matthew, according to Luke, according to Mark. Someone else is writing for Mark, whoever Mark is or Luke is, and today we don't even know who Mark is. No one can tell us his last name or his father's name. We have no idea who Mark is, who Matthew, John, we don't really know, right? And so it's according to, so someone else is writing. And even if you look at the beginning of Luke, it says the person who's writing it said, I'm writing this based on my own testimony, what I've seen. He's like the Sheikh said, this biographical accounts are being put together, right? So I think that's a very important point. And the second thing is that not only was it multimodal, there's no traceability back to Jesus Christ. There's no transmission, there's no link, there's no chain. So it's not verifiable, right? So it won't qualify as testimony or empirical evidence, right? Sorry, I just wanted to add that in. Yeah.
I mean, of course you guys would differ, right? But I mean, in terms of how we would look at it, that's how we would assess the differences between them. Now, also, there's another important point as well. Like when we say that the previous scriptures have been corrupted, does that mean that we reject the entire Torah as it is or reject the entire gospel? Like we won't necessarily do that. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, like he taught the Muslims what our attitude should be towards the previous scriptures, right? So he taught us the epistemology of how we should view them. We can divide the information that you find in the Gospels and the Old Testament into three categories. You have information that the Qur'an affirms. Okay, that there was Moses and like basically like a lot of the details of the stories. And then there's information that the Qur'an contradicts. That information that the Qur'an contradicts, we would reject, right? So, like for example, with Aaron constructing the calf, we would say that's not true because the Qur'an makes it very clear that he doesn't do it, right? But then you have the third category, which is information that we remain agnostic about in terms of our accepting of it, right? Now, if you were to classify the information in the previous scriptures according to all three of these categories, which is the biggest category? The biggest category is the category in which the Qur'an is silent about. Right? So for a Muslim reading, like, and this is the category we don't necessarily have a problem with, right? Because the Qur'an doesn't reject it, but it doesn't affirm it either, but we don't necessarily have an issue with it. So for example, myself as a Muslim, if I read the Gospels, I could read the vast majority of the Gospels, the majority of it, and not necessarily have an issue where I would find things that would contradict the Qur'an. You guys understand where I'm going with this, right? So when we say that it's corrupted, it doesn't mean like as Muslims we believe that it's allowed to like desecrate these works. No, there is still a tremendous level of truth within them. Okay, and that's why like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were there Jews in his community as well? And the answer is yes. And they even came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they asked him to judge among us concerning adultery and fornication. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he asked them to bring the Torah, and they brought it in front of him, right? And he had them read from the passages that discuss the punishment of adultery and fornication, right? So, and then he used that as evidence against them because they didn't want to follow, like the Jews in his time did not want to follow that ruling, right? So whatever agrees with the Quran, 100% we will say, yes, that is from God. Anything that the Quran contradicts, we would say absolutely not. And then there is this big category of things that, okay, we can benefit from. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he told the companions to narrate from these things. And then there's no sin in doing so. So you could mention it, right? In terms of reading it and mentioning these stories in the Old Testament, in the Gospels, we don't necessarily have an issue with doing that. There's no sin in doing so, right?
Yeah, so we believe in the Gospel, we believe in the Torah, we just believe in the original forms, which based on evidence don't exist today, right? So that's the only thing. It's not that we don't believe in the Gospel, we don't believe in the Torah, we do. But what was revealed to Moses, what was revealed to Jesus Christ, those authentic original teachings is what we believe in. And we don't know what those are today because history and science has proven and shown us that they've been changed. And so we only know what's truth, and that's why God sent the latest revelation, which is the Qur'an, which confirms the truth in those and then denies the falsehood that has crept into it by other writers and stuff like that.
So for example, when we read stuff in the Gospels about Jesus, let's say, for example, Jesus fell on his face and he prayed to God. Jesus praying to God, or Jesus, let's say, getting tempted, or, you know, things that human beings can go through and prophets can go through as well. We won't necessarily have an issue with that, right? But anything that, when it comes to the crucifixion and how that happened, then obviously the Quran denies that there is even a crucifixion of him. So that whole section, we would be like, all right, we don't, we wouldn't accept that, okay?